Welcome, the anointed ones. Some people dodge drama, some dodge karma, but you, chosen one, you just matrixed your way past a full-blown spiritual assassination attempt and didn't even flinch. Let that sink in. Because the truth is, you weren't just lucky, you were marked, tracked, and targeted. Something or someone was banking on your downfall. And if we're being brutally honest, it wasn't just a bad phase or a rough patch. You were in the crosshairs of a cosmic takedown, and somehow, without breaking, without begging, without even fully realizing it, you slipped through it like mist through fingers. Fact. Over 78% of people who experience psychological warfare from betrayal, family trauma, narcissistic abuse, and deep spiritual disillusionment never fully recover. But here you are, still standing, still glowing, still untouchable. That ain't chance. That's not positive vibes. That's divine preservation, and more importantly, that's proof of who you really are. You see, when regular folks get hit, they need a team, therapy, 2 years off-grid, and a spiritual retreat in the Himalayas. You walked through hell with your edges still laid and your sense of humor fully intact. And while they were busy aiming their bullets, they forgot one little detail. You don't just survive, you redirect energy like a spiritual GPS with no chill. So buckle up, because in this video, we're breaking down exactly what you dodged, how you did it, and why your survival just exposed everything they tried to keep hidden. By the end of this, you're not just going to feel like a walking miracle. You're going to understand why the enemy had a meltdown when you lived. Number one, you didn't dodge a bullet. You were the decoy for a war that wasn't yours. What almost took you out wasn't even meant for you. That's the brutal truth most people around you don't realize. You were just there, standing in a space someone else created, in the middle of a storm someone else summoned. The chaos that wrapped itself around your life wasn't even rooted in your actions, your character, or your choices. You were the decoy. You were the one the spiritual realm used to expose a system, a bloodline, or a dark agreement that had been hiding in plain sight. And it had to be you, because if it was anyone else, they would have crumbled. That bullet you just dodged? It wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated. But here's what makes it deeper. The real target was the system behind you, the sickness that you were born into, the hidden deal someone else made long before you got here. That bullet carried a truth too heavy for most souls to bear. It was designed to break whoever got in its path, and the one who was originally supposed to catch it, they couldn't handle it. So life rerouted it to you. Not to destroy you, but to reveal everything and everyone hiding behind you. That's why the attacks felt so personal. That's why the betrayal cut so deep. That's why the heartbreak hit you in waves you didn't think you could survive. Because you weren't just dealing with today's drama. You were holding the weight of lies that go back generations. You were handed a mess that didn't belong to you just so the truth could be dragged into the light. They needed someone spiritually strong enough to take the hit and survive. That someone was you. You didn't just dodge a bullet. You absorbed its full impact and turned it into revelation. The enemy didn't expect you to walk away sane. They didn't expect you to still be able to love, to trust, or to laugh. And they definitely didn't expect you to figure out what really happened. But you did. And now, everything is exposed, the masks are off, the spell is broken, and you're not just a survivor, you're the proof that spiritual weapons don't work on divine targets. Not when the target becomes the truth. Number two, you were scheduled to self-destruct, but God rewired the bomb. You were set up to self-destruct, not by accident, not by random chance. There was a whole system, seen and unseen, counting on your collapse. People in your life may have smiled in your face, but behind the scenes, they were waiting for the moment you'd break. They fed you lies, played with your emotions, kept you isolated, triggered your pain, and hoped you'd finally snap. And spiritually, it went even deeper. Dark forces monitored your every move, tracking your weak spots, studying your silence, your vulnerability, your tiredness. They knew you were reaching a breaking point, and they thought they had perfect timing. You were moments away from shutting down completely, mentally, emotionally, even physically. That's how close it got. But something happened that no one expected, not even you. At the exact moment when it looked like you'd finally crash, something in you flipped. The wiring in your spirit, hard-coded by divine design, shifted. The trigger they installed to destroy you, it got hijacked. Instead of breaking, you rebooted. Instead of giving up, you went deeper. Your breakdown became a reset. And what was supposed to finish you ended up reactivating a part of you they thought was long gone. That's the miracle they still can't figure out. Because from the outside, nothing changed. But internally, it was like God rewired the entire control system while everyone was watching the meltdown. You didn't just survive, you upgraded. You came back with sharper vision, more wisdom, deeper strength, and a new level of clarity that exposed every lie and every setup. And now, the people and spirits who plotted your fall are confused. They were sure you were done. They were planning your eulogy while God was rewriting your instructions. You didn't get saved at the last second just to breathe easy. You got rescued because your presence is critical to something much bigger. That close call wasn't just about you. It was about timing, legacy, and divine revenge. Every time you laugh now, heal now, succeed now, you are proving that destruction was never your destiny. You were wired to withstand storms most people would fold under, and they'll never understand how the same system they built to break you became the reason you rose. Number 3. What you dodged wasn't a bullet. It was a soul trap, designed to silence your purpose forever. What you escaped wasn't just a bad situation. It was a spiritual setup designed to trap your soul and erase your purpose. That bullet they fired wasn't meant to take your life. It was meant to take your identity. It was crafted to make you question who you are, doubt your voice, and surrender your calling. This wasn't just about pain. It was about programming. They wanted to shift the way you saw yourself so completely that even if you physically lived through it, the real you wouldn't make it out. They weren't aiming for your body. They were after your mind. They were after your will. They were after your divine memory, the part of you that knows who you are and why you're here. And they almost got it. That's why it felt so confusing. That's why you couldn't think straight. That's why everything around you started feeling fake or distorted. It wasn't just emotional. It was spiritual interference. They were hoping you'd lose your grip on reality long enough to be replaced by a version of you they could manipulate, control, or silence forever. But it didn't work. Somehow, even when you didn't understand what was going on, even when you felt numb or completely drained, your soul refused to give up. Something deep inside you remembered the assignment. Something in you said no without needing words. That inner refusal saved you. What's even more powerful is what came after. Once the trap failed, they didn't know what to do with you because now you're aware. Now you've seen how subtle the attack really was. You saw how people were being used without even knowing it. You felt how your energy was being drained, your spirit being caged, your name being stripped of its meaning. And now, you've come out of that with clarity they can't manufacture and power they can't cancel. That trap was designed to leave you lost and disconnected for years. It was meant to make you settle for a version of yourself far below your destiny. But you broke out. And not only did you survive it, you exposed it. That's why you walk differently now. That's why your presence makes people uncomfortable. You're not confused anymore. You're recovered. You're real. And you're not going back. Number 4. You're not just a miracle. You're living proof that hell has loopholes. You weren't supposed to make it, not according to the cycles you were born into, not according to the trauma that tried to rewrite your future, not according to the generational curses that had never been broken before you. Everything said no. The odds, the environment, the family dysfunction, the mental battles, the betrayals, they all pointed to one outcome: collapse. But you found a way out that logic can't explain and religion can't define. You slipped through a spiritual loophole that only those marked by divine authority could even perceive. That's why your story doesn't make sense to most people. People around you watched you go through things that should have crushed you. And now they don't know how to process the fact that you're still here. Clear-headed, grounded, even more powerful than before. It's confusing to them because they watched others go through less and never recover, but you You walked through fire and somehow didn't come out smelling like smoke. Not because you had more resources, not because you had support, but because something beyond human understanding stepped in and made a way where there wasn't one. You weren't just saved, you were snatched out, like a glitch in hell's system. You weren't supposed to be the one that made it out of that toxic household, that abusive relationship, that mental breakdown, that betrayal, that pit of spiritual exhaustion. The enemy counted on the pattern repeating with you, but you broke it. You escaped a fate that had swallowed people for generations. And the most shocking part? You didn't even know how you did it, because it wasn't you doing the escaping. It was something sacred pulling you through. Now you're walking around carrying evidence that spiritual warfare can be reversed, that contracts made in darkness can be canceled, that curses can be overwritten, and that destiny can override damage. You are the living loophole hell never planned for. You're the contradiction the enemy never saw coming. And that's exactly why they can't figure you out. You're not just a miracle. You're a breach in the system. You're proof that divine interference is real and unstoppable when it chooses you. Number 5. Your survival embarrassed entire bloodlines who bet against you. They didn't just want you to fail, they needed you to. Your fall was part of a long-standing agreement, a generational pattern that kept your bloodline bound and broken. You weren't just the next in line to suffer. You were supposed to be the proof that no one escapes, that no one in your family rises, that no one questions the silence. You were chosen not just to carry the weight, but to collapse under it like the ones before you. But instead of breaking, you exposed the entire system. What you survived didn't just free you. It sent shockwaves through both spiritual and natural bloodlines. You embarrassed demons that were assigned to you before you were even born. You shamed the legacy of dysfunction that wore your family name like a badge, because you were never meant to question it. You were never meant to see it. But you saw it all, and you spoke on it. You called it out. You stopped pretending. And in doing that, you did what no one else had the strength, the clarity, or the audacity to do. Your survival wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. The very people who bet on your downfall now have to sit in the awkwardness of your glow. You didn't just get through, you became a light so bright that it revealed every hidden snake, secret curse, and silent betrayal that was woven into your upbringing. They used to laugh at your pain, whisper about your breakdowns, and act like you were too sensitive to survive. But now, you're walking proof that sensitivity is power when it's connected to purpose, and your very presence is making people uncomfortable, not because you've changed, but because you see them now. What they called weakness was actually your awakening. What they tried to bury was actually your root system, and the altar they tried to sacrifice you on, that became the stage for your calling. They wanted you to die with the truth locked inside of you, but you lived and you spoke, and now their entire foundation is cracking. Because one thing bloodlines never expect is the one who breaks the curse walking back into the room fully aware of who they are. Number 6, you're not hard to kill, you're impossible to replace. They keep coming for you not because you're weak, but because you're too important to ignore. You've probably asked yourself, why does it feel like I'm always under attack? And here's the truth that most people will never admit. It's because they can't duplicate you. They've tried, spiritually, emotionally, energetically. But the frequency you carry, the assignment embedded in your soul, it can't be faked, forged, or passed on to a replacement. You're not hard to kill. You're impossible to replace. And that's the real threat. You weren't attacked to be silenced. You were attacked to erase what you're meant to deliver. The gift you hold, your vision, your voice, your spiritual DNA, it plays a role in something far beyond what they can control. The reason you're still here isn't because the attacks weren't powerful, it's because your purpose is fireproof. It's coded into the architecture of something so much bigger that even hell has to stand back when it doesn't work. Every time they thought they'd finally taken you out, they were actually confirming your position. Every failed attempt wasn't just an accident. It was a divine receipt that you're necessary. That's why they try to wear you out, not wipe you out. It's never been about a quick kill. It's been about dragging your energy until you stop showing up, making you doubt your worth until you silence yourself. But even when you were exhausted, misunderstood, isolated, and running on fumes, you didn't fold, and that made them panic, because you weren't supposed to endure all of that and still be able to see clearly. You don't just survive, you disrupt. You walk into rooms and shift atmospheres. You speak, and hidden things start unraveling. You stand still, and people start revealing who they really are. That can't be replaced, that can't be copied, and that's why the opposition never rests. Because once someone like you steps fully into your assignment, systems collapse. You don't just carry light, you carry structure, and without you, something critical falls apart. That's why the darkness keeps coming. Not because you're fragile, but because your very existence makes its whole plan unstable. Number 7. You weren't protected just for you. Your victory set off a chain reaction. You thought your breakthrough was just about you getting your peace back, your mind back, your life back. But it was so much bigger than that. When you made it out of what was trying to destroy you, it didn't just free you, it triggered a release across spiritual networks you didn't even know existed. Your deliverance was a divine domino. Something ancient and locked up in the spirit broke open the moment you said, "I'm done suffering in silence." The moment you chose healing, accountability, truth, and clarity over chaos and confusion, you broke codes that had been holding others in place for generations. You don't realize it, but someone else's chain snapped when you got up that morning and decided not to give up. Someone got their voice back the moment you started speaking truthfully about what happened to you. Someone found the courage to leave, to confront, to recover, because they saw you survive what they were told would kill them. And here's the wild part. You may never meet those people. You may never know their names. But their freedom is tied to your obedience, not your perfection. That's why the enemy came at you so hard. It wasn't just to stop you. It was to prevent the wave your freedom would cause. Darkness isn't intimidated by individuals. It's terrified of chain reactions. Because one chosen person deciding to break a curse is dangerous. But one chosen person setting off 10 others to do the same? That's unstoppable. That's revival. That's why you couldn't be left alone. That's why the attacks were strategic. Because every time you heal, someone else feels a surge of courage. Every time you tell your story, someone else begins to question theirs. Your preservation had nothing to do with pride. It was protection for purpose. God didn't save you just to keep you safe. God saved you so you could activate others. So no, your survival wasn't about ego or proving anyone wrong. It was about divine timing. You were the blueprint for someone else's breakthrough. And now that you've made it out, that ripple effect has already started. The system tried to keep you quiet, but your freedom turned you into a frequency. And now they can't shut you down because you multiplied. Number 8. They tried to gaslight you out of seeing the gun. Now you're teaching others to spot the weapon. They didn't just want to hurt you. They wanted you to believe there was no weapon at all. That the pain was in your head, that your instincts were wrong, that your reactions were too much. They pointed the gun at you and then dared you to call it what it was. When you flinched, they smirked. When you spoke up, they twisted it. And when you finally started backing away, they labeled you the problem. That wasn't just emotional abuse. That was spiritual warfare dressed in charm, guilt trips, and fake concern. And it was calculated. You weren't overreacting. You were under siege. The goal was simple: disarm your discernment. If they could make you question what you saw and felt, they could keep operating in the shadows without resistance. They wanted you to doubt your own clarity so badly that you'd eventually hand them your voice just to keep the peace. But what they didn't account for was your awakening. That moment where everything snapped into focus, not with drama or revenge, but with quiet knowing. When the lies stopped working, when the patterns stopped confusing you, when the fake apologies stopped soothing you, that's when you became dangerous. Because now, you don't just avoid red flags, you break them down. You recognize tone shifts, energy drains, wordplay, strategic silence. You can spot a narcissist in spiritual clothing. You can detect the difference between real support and surveillance. And you're no longer ashamed of how much you feel or how deeply you see. What they mocked as too sensitive turned out to be advanced intuition. What they called crazy was prophetic clarity. What they labeled paranoia was spiritual X-ray vision. You don't just survive manipulation now, you dismantle it. And better yet, you teach others how to see too. Your healing became a curriculum. Your trauma became a toolkit. And your story, it's no longer a whisper of survival. It's a warning shot. You're no longer running from the weapon. You are one. Not to harm, but to expose, to break cycles, to end silence. You are the consequence no one counted on, and the game is over because now you see everything. Number 9. Your silence wasn't strength. It was surveillance. They thought your silence meant you were weak, scared, or clueless. But you weren't sitting quietly in defeat. You were watching everything, listening with your spirit wide open. You saw the tone shifts, the forced smiles, the fake concern dressed up as kindness. While they performed, you documented. While they talked, you took mental notes. Every manipulation, every backhanded compliment, every half-truth and power play. You didn't miss it. You weren't passive. You were in deep observation mode. You didn't speak because you knew the game was bigger than what was being said. You could feel the spiritual weight behind people's words. You could sense when someone's energy didn't match their face. You weren't interested in arguing with liars. You were interested in understanding the system behind the deception. And so you let them talk. You let them dig their own holes. You let them feel comfortable revealing who they were. Because when you're chosen, silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. What they mistook for indifference was actually insight. You weren't rising above the drama. You were gathering the patterns. You were watching who switched sides when the room changed. You were watching who clapped for your wins with tight jaws. You were watching who apologized only when exposure was near. You weren't frozen. You were decoding. And you stored that information not for revenge, but for revelation. Because now you don't just know what happened, you know why. That silence trained you. It sharpened your discernment. It rewired your instincts. It helped you develop a level of spiritual intelligence that can't be taught in books or churches. You can walk into a room and read the energy without anyone saying a word. You can hear truth in someone's voice, or the absence of it. You can sense manipulation before it even takes shape, because you listened when it wasn't safe to speak. Your silence was never cowardice, it was surveillance. And now that you've gathered what you needed, you're not quiet anymore. You're calibrated, you're clear, and you're calling things out with precision they can't defend against. They weren't ready for the version of you who listened first and spoke second, but now that version is walking in purpose. And every liar in the room feels exposed without you even saying a word. Number 10. Your enemy's confidence was their undoing. They didn't just miss, they revealed themselves. They came for you bold and reckless, assuming you were still blind, still naive, still too emotionally wrapped up to see straight. What they didn't realize was that by attacking you so confidently, they handed you the blueprint. Their pride didn't just make them underestimate you, it made them expose themselves. Every move they made, every fake smile, every backhanded word wasn't just an act of harm, it was a confession. Because spiritual vision doesn't need a smoking gun. It only needs proximity and patterns, and they gave you both. The enemy never imagined you'd have the clarity to not just survive, but to analyze, to trace the connections, to hear what wasn't said, to notice who went silent when things got dark for you, to watch who celebrated when you stumbled. What they thought was a clean takedown turned into a full reveal, and while they assumed you were retreating, you were actually recording. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. By the time they realized you were still standing, it was too late. You already had the receipts. Not for revenge, but for release. You saw who they really were, and now you know what to never let close again. They didn't just miss when they fired at you, they malfunctioned. Their weapon turned inward. Their slander fell flat. Their alliance crumbled. Their manipulation tactics that once worked on everyone else failed miserably on you. Because you weren't operating on emotion, you were operating from elevation. And when you watch the storm from higher ground, you don't get pulled into chaos. You map it out. Now, you move with intel they never meant to give you. You know the energy behind the words. You know the fear behind the mask. You know who was sent and who was self-serving. The attack gave you X-ray vision and the boldness they used to come for you. It's now the mirror reflecting everything they tried to hide. You didn't just dodge the bullet. You watched it in slow motion, studied the shooter, traced the fingerprints, and left the scene with clarity they can't recover from. And now that you see them fully, the game is over. Not because you won, but because they finally showed you who they've always been. Number 11. They used every weapon, but the one thing they can't manufacture: favor. They tried everything. Covert tactics, public smear campaigns, subtle sabotage, charm in one hand and a knife in the other. They threw spells, curses, gossip, shade, and spiritual traps. But there was one thing they didn't have, and no matter how many dark tools they reached for, they couldn't fake it: favor. And that was the one thing that made every single attack collapse under its own weight. Favor isn't something you earn like a paycheck. It's not about being good enough, smart enough, or even strong enough. It's something divine that's built into you from the start, etched into your spirit before you took your first breath. Favor isn't about being better than anyone else. It's about being assigned. And no matter what they did, they could never manufacture your assignment. They couldn't steal your oil because it wasn't in a jar. It was in your design. They thought if they threw enough dirt, your name wouldn't rise. If they twisted the narrative, you'd lose credibility. If they isolated you, you'd lose momentum. If they blocked you, God would stop moving. But favor doesn't play by man's rules. It doesn't take polls. It doesn't check popularity. It doesn't need permission. Favor interrupts protocol and overrides setups. Every time they crafted a weapon, favor rerouted the outcome. That's why the gun jammed every time. It wasn't a glitch. It was divine interference. Favor makes you look untouchable, but people don't see the warfare behind your survival. They don't know how many nights you cried, how many times you doubted, how close you were to giving up. They only see the bounce back, the glow, the wins that shouldn't have been possible after what you went through. And that's what really bothers them. Because despite everything they did, you still have favor. And they can't decode it, dilute it, or destroy it. You weren't kept because you were perfect. You were kept because you were called. And the throne they tried to keep you from, it already has your name engraved. That's why none of it worked, not the spells, not the slander, not the traps. Because the one thing they couldn't touch was the very thing carrying you the whole time: favor. And it doesn't bend, it covers. Number 12. You didn't just survive death. You changed its definition. You didn't just brush up against death. You lived through versions of it that don't have tombstones but leave scars just the same. The kind of deaths that don't make the news, but they end people every day. Death of the ego, when you realize the version of yourself you built to survive was suffocating the real you. Death of relationships you swore would last forever, but had to let go of to save your soul. Death of trust, when you realize not everyone who smiles is safe. Death of belief, when you stopped trying to earn love and decided to embody it instead. And through it all, you didn't just keep breathing. You transformed. You shed skins so thick they felt like entire lives. You outgrew rooms while people were still trying to chain you to your past. You let parts of yourself die that no longer matched your frequency. And somehow, in that process, you discovered a different kind of life, one they don't teach you about. A life rooted in spirit, not survival. A life where you're not defined by your wounds, but by your wisdom. See, real chosen ones don't fear death anymore, because we've already buried versions of ourselves that were more dangerous to us than our enemies ever were. What scares the world about you now isn't your survival, it's that you came back new, stronger, sharper, softer in spirit, but harder to deceive. They tried to bury you, not realizing you weren't in a coffin, you were in a cocoon. Now the people who tried to mourn your failure are watching your resurrection in real time. The ones who threw dirt are stuck watching flowers grow from the same place they thought they ended you. They don't understand how you're still here, thriving, glowing, elevating. That's because you've evolved past their understanding of life and death. To them, death is the end. But to you, death is just data, a chapter, a clearing. You didn't just survive death, you redefined it. You showed that being broken isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of real power. And now you're not haunted by what almost killed you. You're powered by it. Number 13. They thought killing your confidence would be enough. They never saw the resurrection coming. They never had to lay a hand on you. Their weapon of choice was psychological, subtle digs, cold shoulders, whispered doubts, strategic rejections. Their goal wasn't to destroy your life outright. It was to dismantle your self-belief from the inside out. Because if they could assassinate your confidence, they wouldn't have to stop your purpose. You'd stop yourself. And for a while it worked. You second-guessed your gifts. You shrank yourself to make others comfortable. You stayed quiet when your soul was screaming. You looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the one staring back. That was the real battle. Not survival, but identity. And while they celebrated what they thought was your decline, you were in the shadows, breaking apart the illusion. You were confronting every lie you inherited, every label they stuck on you, every seed of doubt planted in your childhood. The resurrection didn't happen in a spotlight. It happened in silence, in solitude, in the nights when you had nothing left to prove and everything left to reclaim. You met your raw self, the version they tried to convince you didn't exist, and you chose them. That's when the real danger began, because when a chosen one remembers who they are, the atmosphere shifts. You didn't just heal, you ignited. Your presence started exposing agendas. Your confidence started triggering insecurities you never even knew they had. You walked into rooms you used to shrink in, and suddenly people didn't know where to look. That's because they were never scared of your mouth. They were scared of your clarity. And now, you see right through them. You didn't become arrogant. You became aligned. And the radiance of that alignment is blinding to those who were comfortable controlling you in your confusion. You're not just glowing, you're radioactive. Because your confidence isn't rooted in praise anymore. It's rooted in proof. Proof that you survived. Proof that you're called. Proof that the rejection was redirection. And now, they can't touch you. Not because you're untouchable, but because you're undeniable. They tried to kill your confidence thinking that would be the end. What they didn't realize was, confidence in a chosen one isn't something that dies. It resurrects, stronger, louder, and this time, untamed. Number 14. You're not a survivor. You're a spiritual system update. You're not just someone who made it out. That language doesn't even scratch the surface of what happened. Survivors escape. You transformed the entire battlefield. You didn't just navigate a storm. You altered the atmosphere so future storms would hit differently for everyone coming after you. You upgraded the whole spiritual terrain by walking through hell and not adopting its language, its fear, or its logic. That's not survival. That's a full-on system override. The attacks didn't start missing because the enemy gave up. They missed because you're no longer running on the same spiritual operating system. You're not governed by trauma-based reflexes anymore. You're not triggered the same way. You're not baited by distraction or confusion like before. They still use the same tricks, lies, isolation, emotional sabotage, but now it's like they're speaking an outdated dialect. They're typing in corrupted code, trying to hack something that's no longer connected to their grid. You've gone offline from their reach and online with divine protocol. Your elevation didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, in the dark nights when you chose alignment over approval, when you chose healing over pretending, when you stopped just surviving and started upgrading. You didn't just bounce back. You rebuilt your spiritual infrastructure. You recoded your self-worth. You upgraded your discernment software. Your heart has new firewalls. Your mind has new encryption. You no longer run on fear updates or people-pleasing plugins. You're running Divine Unkillable 7.7. A system that hell literally can't process. That's why they're confused. Why their access feels jammed. Why their words bounce off. Why their setups misfire. It's not that you're lucky. It's that you're no longer compatible with the tactics that used to tear you apart. You've evolved beyond their reach. You're not a glitch in the system. You're the new system. The living, walking patch that broke every generational curse they thought would run forever. You're the spiritual update no one saw coming, but everyone's now forced to reckon with. Hell's outdated, you're not. And that's the most dangerous part. You're not just healed, you're upgraded. Let's be clear. This wasn't just survival. This was spiritual software evolution. This was divine disruption. This was a cosmic jailbreak from systems, seen and unseen, that were designed to either silence you, distract you, drain you, or erase you. But none of it worked. Not because the weapons weren't real, but because you stopped operating on the frequency that made you a match for them. You stopped responding to guilt, manipulation, and shame. You stopped needing validation to walk in authority. You stopped mistaking suffering for loyalty. And that's when the old attacks started failing. That's when Hell's code started glitching every time it tried to re-enter your atmosphere. You didn't survive by chance. You were chosen by design. Your existence is a rupture in patterns that have ruled for generations. You're the ghost they couldn't kill, the flame they couldn't smother, the seed they thought they buried, not knowing it would sprout roots so deep it would shift tectonic plates. You didn't just escape. You altered the laws of engagement. You set a precedent in the spiritual realm. You made it clear. Favor isn't fragile, and calling isn't negotiable. The resurrection of your confidence was a warning shot. The evolution of your insight was a weapon they never expected. And your silence? That wasn't weakness, it was strategy. You were listening through walls, collecting codes, and preparing for a level where you wouldn't need to fight to be seen. Your existence would be the announcement. Now your glow isn't just beauty, it's intel. Your walk isn't just healed, it's encoded. You carry a frequency that makes liars stutter, manipulators squirm, and watchers panic. Not because you seek revenge, but because you carry revelation. You are proof that favor outranks fear, that grace outruns gossip, that spiritual authority doesn't shout, it shifts rooms. So let them talk. Let them wonder how you made it, how you're still rising, how nothing seems to stick. They'll never figure it out, because they're trying to decode a system that wasn't built in human language. You're not just a survivor. You're a walking update, an unexplainable glitch in the enemy's script. And the most terrifying part for your enemies? You're just getting started. If this message hit your spirit like truth always does, don't keep it to yourself. Let it breathe. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another download tailored for the chosen. Tap like if this reminded you just how powerful, unkillable, and divinely upgraded you really are. Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story, your fire, your survival, your rise. And if you know someone who's been fighting silent wars and needs to be reminded they're not alone, share this with them. This channel isn't just content, it's a call, a sanctuary for the misread, the underestimated, the spiritually built from scratch. So turn on notifications, because your next confirmation might just be in the next upload. You're not here by accident. You're here because the frequency found you. Stay aligned, stay unshakable, and always remember, you didn't just survive, you're the reason the old system crashed. See you in the next video, family. God bless you.